So, thank you for coming. Welcome to one of Victoria's events for International Development Week, which we're right in the middle of and is an annual event in our country, across the country. We're really happy this wasn't yesterday, although maybe people are too scared to come out yet. I don't know. It's easy to stay home in this kind of weather. Would you just please turn off your cell phones, if you haven't? My name is Anita Mark. I am the chair of the steering committee for the South Vancouver Island chapter of the BCCIC, and that is the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation. This evening is, we're calling it International Development Mosaic, and we are creating a mosaic. We've got a very mosaical panel, and let's see. We're having a panel discussion tonight, and our moderator, Carla, who is going to come up in a sec, she facilitates resource development and capacity building with non-profit organizations, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about her in a few secs. She's going to lead the panelists through a discussion of the global and local connections of our work, our collective work, the significance of the Sustainable Development Goals, which we also know as the SDGs, so that's an acronym, and if you hear SDG or any of the other ones that may pop up during this evening, please, if you don't know what they are, put your hand up. Like, we'll be saying BCCIC, and that is the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, which is a mouthful. So we say BCCIC. We are sort of calling our chapter for South Vancouver Island, the lower half of the island, the South, SOVI, South Van Isle. And I think that'll be somewhere in your program. Anyway, and you should also have a program. Minor detail. The goals are the successors to the Millennium Development Goals, which ended in 2015. And there were, was it 8 of them? Someone correct me if I'm wrong. There was some success, in fact, quite a bit of success in certain areas and very little success in other of these goals. On your colorful handout, you will see that there are now, like, as opposed to the Millennium Development Goals, these have 17 goals, and there are all kinds of subsets, and I think it totals 169 of the, does it say here on here? Yes, 169 targets, which is one heck of a lot of work. And some people find this rather daunting, but it's the work of the world for the next, well, not quite 15 years, because it started in 2015. But it is the biggest project that the world has ever undertaken, ever. And for the first time in history, we have a shared global vision for how we want to meet the challenges and problems of our world and to save our planet. We have come to agreement. And as the former UN chief Ban Ki-moon has said, there is no plan B, and there is no planet B. Some of you may have heard that the other night. We had a gathering on the 30th at Commonwealth. The second item, or one of the items in your folder, is this plain sheet of paper. This is from Vancouver office, and it gives you more of a history of the goals. If you were at the event on the 30th, you got a really wonderful explanation from one of the staff people from Vancouver. This is what he sent as a sort of a little compact history of the goals. So that's something that you can read at your leisure. And you'll find that some of the things I've said are in the last paragraph. What else? Let's see. So what is the SOVI, South Vancouver Island chapter? Basically, this chapter is a group of members, because it's a membership base, who have come together in this location to participate in British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, initiatives, programs, and services. And also to network, because that's a huge piece of what we do, networking. And that's something we're really happy to have this organization to fulfill on, because there are so many of us here doing so many cool things, and we don't always network or come together under this umbrella, which is how I explain it. It's like an umbrella. Excuse me, I sniff. On the back of your program, there is a lot about the BCCIC, everything you need to know, how to join, and in fact, Linda, our coordinator, who is sitting there, would you put your hand up? If you'd like to become a member, if you're not already, you could certainly see Linda at some point in the evening. There are group memberships, individual memberships, actually 2 individual memberships. So the last, well, not the last thing, but one of the other things is you have an index card here. And you might even have a pen, maybe a red pen. We're using these as places to write a question. When the panel is pretty much finished speaking, if you have a question, please fill that out. Just sort of put your hand up in the air like that, and someone will collect it for you. That way, if there's duplications, we can get that managed. Okay. Oh, and we're recording this. Just for future reference, it may show up. It'll be on various websites, I'm sure. I'm hoping it'll be on the BCCIC website. So for all the thousands of people that didn't come out tonight, they'll be able to see it. So now I'm going to introduce our moderator. Her name is Carla Funk. And as she puts it, you know, her bio, she consults and writes. Okay, but there's a little more than that. And I'm going to read this. Carla completed her doctorate at Royal Roads in 2016. Her research examined the role of private, philanthropic, philanthropic aid on international poverty reduction and development, focusing in Tanzania. She has spent 15 years in local Canadian nonprofit management, where she facilitates resource development and capacity building. She has previously lived and worked in Ethiopia, managing a program feeding refugees, in Zimbabwe on food security and education-related projects, and in Switzerland working for a private foundation committed to supporting education for poverty-stricken populations of Southern Africa and Eastern Europe. She has a special interest in First Nations initiatives and helped to facilitate a strategic alliance with BC's First Peoples Council and with Google.org to create the Global Endangered Languages Project. I'm interested in that. Almost. You can come on up, doesn't matter. She's currently designing a leadership skills training package for nonprofit managers based on lessons learned through her research and on global philanthropy and international development aid. She's going to lead a discussion with our panelists on how they are incorporating the Sustainable Development Goal principles. We also call those the global goals because, as again, SDG, I mean, there are mouthfuls, right? And how they incorporate them into their professional practices and organizations. So I'd like to welcome Carla, please.
Thank you so much, Anita. Welcome, everybody. We just want to get straight to this great panel who is sitting here ready for some questions from us. But before I do that, I wanted to just give you a brief idea of who we have sitting in front of us here. Our first panelist here is Joachim Carolsfeld, better known as Yogi. He's the executive director of World Fisheries Trust. He grew up in a small coastal town in BC and has a really impressive array of accomplishments that all focus around marine biology. His doctorate was working with fish pheromones and reproduction, and for the past decade he's combined his marine science knowledge with social sciences, and that he's designing and implementing multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder projects. And to his left, your right, is Suzanne Dane. Suzanne Dane is an entrepreneur and a certified management consultant with over 25 years business experience across Canada and internationally. And she focuses on entrepreneurial training and development, customizing materials to specific groups such as at-risk youth, women, and Indigenous communities. And she also teaches business management courses through the Faculty of Management at Royal Roads University. To her left, we have April Ingham. Throughout her career, April has managed complex projects in a cross-cultural, multi-stakeholder projects. She's worked as a productions manager for the Indigenous Arts and Cultural television show The New Canoe, and was part of the development team for the web-based Indigenous language archiving system, First Voices. We have a shared past there. She's the executive director of Pacific Peoples Partnerships, whose mandate is to support the aspirations of Pacific Islanders for peace, justice, environmental sustainability, and development. Connecting Indigenous peoples north-south for knowledge exchange is central to her work. And now we have Tim Maloney and I worked together for a number of years. He has had a 39-year career in the nonprofit world, and he's currently the National Director of Mercy Ships, which works with host nations to strengthen the local healthcare delivery system at the same time that they provide surgical needs to the host country and a variety of training opportunities for medical professionals, such as surgeons, nurses, administrators, and community health workers. Tim tries living life according to the words, have hope, take risks, and seek harmony, and above all, be kind. And I know that he is true to those words. John Mitchell is the chairman of the board of Innovative Communities. His career as a human resources executive, management consultant, and lecturer led him to challenges of integrating communications technologies to enable positive social change. Through his work with communities, he's assembled a worldwide team that is connected by the internet. His area of interest lies in organizational management and development with strong, transparent fiscal management. And last but not least, we have Asia Sherlock, who is a student of child and youth care at the University of Victoria. Her interests lie in arts, cultural relations, and youth empowerment. She recently returned from a 6-month international youth internship program in Zambia with the Victoria International Development Education Association, also known as VIDEA. So please join me in welcoming this wonderful panel. So just a quick word from myself about why are we even here. And when I was doing my research in Tanzania, looking at and interviewing, I interviewed 90 people from 35 different organizations, doing 140 interviews in total, looking at the nonprofit sector and from a private philanthropic perspective. And one of the questions I asked people was what advice would they give to their younger selves? If they were to have started and they would want to have a mentor, what was the number one question they would ask? And their number one question was to collaborate and share and to network more. And so it made me realize that what we're doing is that, the greatest weakness of the sector is that we're not learning from each other. We're not learning the lessons that others have learned before us. We've not, the lessons that you may have learned years ago have stayed with you, but those lessons may not necessarily transfer to the colleagues you work with or between the organizations. So tonight, this evening is all about sharing, networking, and hopefully finding ways to collaborate and also to pool our collective energy and find that magic of synergy. So, to our panelists, I'm going to ask each of them to answer the first question, and then after that I'm going to ask specific questions to specific panelists. So I'll start with Yogi. Oh, sure, I'll just skip you. Which SDG do you identify with as being important to your work? And I'm going to hand you the microphone because I know not everybody can hear, including me.
Well, I think this one-pager here that came out of the Vancouver office, makes an important point, is that the SDGs do not stand alone. And I think, it's a reorganization, maybe a name of things that many of us do anyways. And it's very difficult to say, well, this is the SDG that I'm working with. So I would say, there has been sort of a larger grouping there, which it was called People and Planet, Prosperity and Partnership, right? So that's sort of a larger grouping of these SDGs. And I would say that we work primarily in that interface of the people and the planet. So that includes a number of these SDGs, which are, environment and, of course, I don't know. I think we work with all of these. We work poverty alleviation, food security, healthy lives. I think, equitable education. We don't really work too much on prosperity because we're not that prosperous ourselves. But I think it's a difficult question to say, well, this is the one I identify with most. I think I would identify with a good third of them.
Thank you so much, Yogi. I'm going to ask the same question of Suzanne. Suzanne?
I definitely agree with your sentiment. I think it's difficult just to focus on one of the SDGs because there's an interconnected relationship between many of them. Just by a little bit of background and way of context, through One Love Africa, we provide micro-enterprise training only to remote village women. We don't deal in more of the developed areas, startup funding, and then we provide ongoing support. So through that umbrella, I think that there's 3 of the SDGs that we're really focused on. Number 1 is poverty, reducing poverty. By building the capacity and through economic development for the women, that in turn helps alleviate some of the day-to-day issues they're dealing with. It's been proven that once they get just a little bit of money and they can provide food for their children, the next thing they look at is health. The other one naturally around gender and empowering women and girls naturally by virtue of what we do. And the other one is around equitable access to education. Education is a poor situation in Tanzania at best, but when it's related to women, it's even worse because there's so many other variables that come into play that just hinder their opportunities to advance in any way, and they have no legal rights in Tanzania. So I think it would probably be those 3. I'll pass it on.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so happy you all came out. I came out from Souk, so there you go. We made it. Our organization, Pacific People's Partnership, has been around for 41 years in Victoria, and throughout that history, we began working on peace initiatives, but partnerships are the heart of who we are. But planet, people, and prosperity are all part of that. It's very holistic, and I highlighted all the different ones we're working on one way or another. But the one that I'd really like to highlight is around partnership, because we're a small organization. We wouldn't exist after all these years if it wasn't for partners. That's why we believe in networks. That's why we're here. That's why we have such great volunteers, and we partner with organizations like MediaNet, and so we do partnering. That's how we get the ripples out there and really make things happen. And so we've got partners all over the world and nationally, all across Canada, in USA, all over, and across sectors too, because we can learn so much when we step out of our boxes. We're partners with universities, partners with traditional knowledge keepers, partners with scientists, and all over, because it's all about being open and also being open to new ideas and to being innovative together, and we can't do that in a box.
Well, I have to slightly disagree from my organization's perspective because we really focus on number 3. Health. But that particular goal has 13 sub-goals, none of which are surgery. So from Mercy Ship's perspective, we're almost misplaced. Yet I can tell you that doing the surgeries that we do, doing the training that we do, we've touched directly 2.5 million lives in the last 40 years and delivered $1.3 billion worth of health care. Some statistics that really woke me up about a year ago. The Lancet Commission did a study on accessibility to surgeries. Right now, 81 million people a year go bankrupt because they had to have surgery. And if we could take 5,000 surgeries for every 100,000 people right now, it would cost us about $8 billion, but it would turn $22 trillion into the GDP globally. So this notion of doing one little thing within all of these goals can make a big impact as well. And my other point was if there were 50 more people here, there'd be more people in the town I grew up in, Saskatchewan.
Thanks. We've got the town. Thanks. It's good to be here this evening and to share ideas and passion. And that's ideas and passion is what was behind the formation of what became InnovativeCommunities.org Foundation. And we have operations, or as we like to call them, projects / we have a better name than that, which I'll come to in a minute, initiatives. And an initiative is different to us than a project. Initiative is far wider, far broader. So we operate in 4 major areas of the globe. Each one is a continent. And we've helped 65,000 people, approximately. Every one of those recipients received 100 cents in the dollar of the money donated to that initiative. Everything was supported 100% by volunteers. No one was paid, and we try to be as 100% transparent as possible. To do that, then, that involves a different approach to how you organize and you manage and you do things. So we've come at it slightly differently than the majority of people. We have a passion, but we want to find a better way to make that passion effective and build communities. So when we look at our constitution crafted by our friends at Canada Revenue Agency, which all of us here, I'm sure, just shake our heads sometimes at. No one's here, I hope. End poverty in all forms everywhere, number 1. Okay, that fits us. We're supposed to end poverty or help the poor legally. Number 4 is ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Yeah, we try to do that as well. That doesn't really explain the fact that here in Victoria we started the first wet house in Canada for people with multiple issues with homelessness, addiction, and mental health, which we sold to Kool-Aid now 4 years ago. How does that fit? In other words, I share the same feeling as the other panelists. There isn't just one thing. It all comes together. It's all interlocked in a complex 3 or even a 4-dimensional matrix, and understanding that so that people are fully involved is complex. So the only thing that I can really turn around and say, what gets me to go to bed and get up in the morning? Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. Provide access to justice for all, and I see that as social justice as well. And build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So my passion, I suppose, in our organization really comes down to is, how do we make it happen? Number 16. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor to sit with these exceptional panelists, especially as an intern. A millennial intern, forgive me. Yes, as you already know, I'm from VIDEA. Most of the work VIDEA engages in is, I would say, gender equality. And like all of our panelists have already echoed, I think that all of the goals really intertwine together. So you can't fix one without fixing another. But gender equality is definitely a running theme in all of our partner organizations in Eastern and Southern Africa that we work with. All those organizations work directly to empower women and girls. And often they do that through working with men as well, and it's very community-based. And VIDEA works as allies in a supportive role to these organizations and their work. And we really believe that gender equality is a cross-cutting issue, and it's something that exists in all countries. So when you work with gender equality or inequality, you're really working to support economic development and other positive initiatives like that. So yes, I'd say that's what VIDEA works with most closely. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Asia. So I think, we can already see that this is a really complex discussion. The Sustainable Development Goals are not, I guess we would have solved poverty 60 years ago if this had been a simple thing, and the complexities coming out when you start talking interconnectedness and the matrix that this creates. So my next question, I'm going to actually do two questions. One will be more at the global level, and the other one is going to be more at the local level. Now, the first one I'm going to be asking is of Tim and John. You answered it a little bit, but I'll give you just an opportunity to get into it a little bit more deeply. How do you or your organization see yourselves contributing to the SDGs at the global level? So I'm going to give this to John first, and then we could pass it to Tim. That would be great.
As I mentioned, we already operate in 4 continents to a lesser or greater extent. Where we begin to look at some of the major issues that we deal with organizationally and working with the community, we find that you end up with slivers. And those slivers could be, this school needs a roof so the kids can go to school. Okay, now what? Now what do you do next? Okay, then you do desks, then you kind of work your way through. Then we begin to see and look at the whole profile of across. How about employment? How about those situations? What we find continually is that people focus to a specific interest area, which is understandable and human. But looking at the broad context and trying to integrate that within the community itself, so the community itself is heard, that is a far more complex thing. And that is something that actually part of the team who are here this evening, who are focusing to how do we get indigenous local people fully involved in those outcomes, rather than, and I have to be careful as I say this, the traditional method of top-down that we know best because somehow we might be economically more advanced. That's a question mark. How do we get people involved? So in terms of how do we do that, we'll be fascinated to hear how people go about doing it, because that's specifically what we are tasking ourselves for. How do we get local people themselves involved rather than having a prescriptive approach from us? And also, without offending people, because that is not what I intend, how do we stop people who need justice in their lives from having people decide elsewhere what justice is, and that our model is the way it should be? I have big issues with that. So in terms of what Innovative Communities is doing, we're opening that dialogue up. We're attempting to work our way through it. Do we have a roadmap and solution to that? And the answer plainly is no, we don't. Are we open to working with other organizations, other people of goodwill around the world to work their way through to that? We are very, very open.
Globally, we work with one country at a time, because right now we have one ship. Well, we're called Mercy ships. We have one ship, but over the years we've been in 57 different countries that have invited us to come to be with them. We don't show up and say, we're here, let's go to work. And the model has shifted over the years to the current application is we'll arrive in country and stay with the ship for 10 months. So we bring the world's largest hospital ship that's not owned by a government to a country and provide free medical services to the poor. And the ship has to give you perspective, it has 5 operating rooms, 82 ward beds. It has a crew of 450 volunteers from around the world that are typically, on average, from somewhere between 35 and 40 nations at one time. And the lever that allows us to do the work that we have is those volunteers, besides volunteering, pay their way to be on the ship, and they pay board and room while they're there. And so that's the big lever. After nearly 40 years in the nonprofit world, everybody always asks you, you raise $1, how much goes to programming? We're very pleased to be able to say that if you give Mercy Ships $1, $3 goes to programming because of the nature of how we're able to utilize pieces. But it's the notion that we go to the country that's invited us. We develop a country engagement plan that usually lasts for about 6 years. So a couple of years of pre-ship activity, we'll be doing things. So right now, one of our office mates is going to go to Guinea in about a month to do an assessment. The ship will arrive in 2 years, but between now and then, there'll be activity that goes on and prepares. So last week, our board in Mercy Ships Canada decided to fund what we call the Hope Center, which is for pre- and post-operative care in a country for Cameroon next year. So we're going to go and spend $1 million developing a 250-bed unit so that when we leave the country, it's still there, and work through capacity kinds of structures. So it's this notion of trying to, that changed over the years. We don't just go do what we do, we try to leave an impact. And two surgeons from Benin, the last time we were there, came on the ship for about a month, learned the skills in eye surgery. Prior to their spending that month with us, they were doing about 10 cataract surgeries a week. Now they're doing 100. So that kind of push out. So lots of different activities.
Thanks so much, both of you. That's kind of inspiring to hear from sleepy little Victoria the kinds of things that are happening globally. And now to turn it to a little bit more locally, I'm going to be asking this question and asking April and Asia to answer. How would you engage local communities on global issues? And are these methods that everyone could use? I'm going to start with you, Asia, just so that the microphone keeps going back logically.
Thank you. Engaging communities locally, I think that I'm interested to hear actually what other people have to say on this, because I think there's lots of things you could do. For example, we're already at an event such as that right now. This is us locally engaging about global issues, so this is wonderful. As an education association, VIDEA engages local communities through events. We just did one, I forget what it was called, I think we do it every year, where, for example, my earrings have come from, sorry? Yes, yeah, the fair, where we sell goods from our partner countries that we go in, so Uganda, Tanzania, South Africa, and Zambia. So events such as that happen throughout the year. Mostly I would say, though, that returned interns are the ones who do a lot of the public engagement. Every intern is required to do about 10 public engagement activities when they come home. And a lot of that is presentations that they organize themselves. They engage high schools, and at just community events, they share their experiences that they had overseas. And I am actually on one of those right now. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you.
Hi. One of the things that's so wonderful about these new goals is that they're universal in nature. So that means that the goals that we aspire to achieve in the developing world, we also need to achieve right here at home. And that's one of the things that really excites me about this, the new goals, because our organization has been working north-south on those issues since basically our inception. So when you ask about, well, how do you engage people locally? And I think sometimes that's where it starts, because sometimes when people are in need here locally, how do you, make the argument for giving overseas? And I was talking to the mayor of Calgary, and he was saying, well, maybe what you need to do is you need to do one thing for your community, one thing for your province or your country, and one thing globally. And if everybody did those three things, what an amazing world it would be. And, when we think about, well, how do we engage people? We do that through, like you say, events like this, having, our voices heard and engaging in dialogue together. We do it through networking. We do it through that. But I think the most important thing we need to do is to tell our stories. We need to get our words out there of the people that we meet, and the stories that we're hearing. Our organization has a really strong media focus that we've been developing thanks to our friend over there, Kirk, who's with MediaNet. And for instance, he's been helping to train interns and different people how to use media to help to bring our stories to a bigger audience. Before, we felt like communications was always really important to us. We had a 28-year publication called Talk Blong Pacific. And it was really super important because it had it synthesized the issues and the stories and the great concerns and news of the South Pacific at a point where there was nothing else like it. It lived in people's libraries, and it was passed from person to person for many years. So it was really very key publication. But time being what it is, and internet and access to that, and the cost of distribution, we couldn't continue doing that. So we needed to find new ways. So now we're doing podcasting. We're doing a YouTube channel where we've got regular features. We're broadcasting our stuff. I think many of the charities and people here locally work with Shaw. Get your stuff out there so that people can see it. So telling the stories and being brave and not, being afraid of being vulnerable a little bit, because you know what? None of us have all the answers. We're all learning.
Thanks so much. I love the message about being brave and getting yourself out there, because I think that's in some ways what we're all doing when we're stepping out into fairly uncharted territory, particularly in the complexities of the worlds that we're trying to engage with. So that's a fantastic message. So I have another question that I'm going to be asking Yogi and Suzanne. From your perspective, how does political will affect moving forward on SDGs? Can they be achieved without political will, or even against it? I'm going to start with Suzanne.
Thank you. I think it's very challenging to move forward. Certainly we're working against political will. And on both sides, or the multiple countries that we deal with. So I think we do need to look at political support. We can definitely move forward without it, but it's just a little bit of a heavier road. We do need local funding, or funding from local sources. But I know for myself, working in Tanzania, it's critically important that we also get political will from the political structure. Not the same as our structure, but it's important that when we enter into villages or communities that we first receive the approval by the tribal chiefs. They can become great allies towards helping us achieve shared goals. But again, it's that shared knowledge and that shared vision that solicits that support and creates those partnerships.
Yeah, I think I'd reflect that idea as well. I have a couple of ex-politicians on my board, and some of the comments they make is you can get more done in 20 minutes in your political office than you can by 15 years complaining. But in reality, it's a matter of lining things up so that in those 20 minutes, you as a citizen or something, if it comes up, you're ready to get something done. And I know in Brazil we moved through the variety of types of partnerships of with NGOs, with activists, and with universities, and at the end of the day, when we were working with the government, we got more done. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But it doesn't mean that when you don't have that, you stop doing things. And I think it's a challenge, but be brave.
Back to bravery. Political will, absolutely such a key factor, which is probably why it was given its own question. I didn't create the questions, by the way. The credit goes to the committee that put this entire panel together and created this event. So the other key factors is my next question. So political will is one item that was deserving of a full question on its own, but in your work, and this is a question that I'm addressing now to John and Tim again, in your work, have there been key factors aside from political will, which we just spoke about, that have helped you to move forward on one of the SDGs, or I guess if you can't tease it apart, just from the SDGs? I'm going to start with Tim this time.
Thanks, Carla. I'm going to go back for a second. And I'll use an example of when we were in Congo-Brazzaville a couple of years ago, and one of the advanced team members is meeting with the Minister of Health at the bequest of the President to say these are the things we need in this negotiation around what's going on, because they've asked us to come, and the Minister of Health said, okay, now if I give you these things, what are you going to give me? And she looked him in the eye and said, I'm giving you nothing. I'm giving your citizens all of the things that we're going to give. And he said, no, you're not going to get what you want from me unless you give me something. And she said, can I tell the President that tomorrow? And he said, you will never do that. Watch me. I mean, it's this whole notion of being brave, don't be afraid to give an invitation for fear it'll be refused, this notion that we need to stand up because what we're doing is right. From a perspective of what we have no perspective with the government in Canada. We've never had a dime. We've applied a couple of times, but it's not about getting the government here on side, in my opinion. It's about getting the people on side. It's about telling, as April and I were talking earlier tonight, it's about telling the stories. 9 years ago when I joined Mercy Ships, I asked my team how many press releases did we have last year about Mercy Ships, and the answer was 0. And I then asked them how many Canadians served last year, and they said, oh, about 50. And I said, doesn't it make sense that each one of those 50 would have had a story about them before they left and a story about them coming back, and it would probably be in the East Hanging River Hyde newspaper or whatever little town they came from across the country. But to tell their stories about what they're doing, that makes a difference within this whole global perspective. And so for me, it's, again, this isn't complicated. It's really about just being forthright and telling people what we're about, sharing the story, moving forward. And now it's John's turn.
Thanks, Tim. As human beings, we have a big issue, and that's our vulnerability. And the word this evening has come out a few times. And as human beings, vulnerability, we try to share that. And we try to share that with friendship. And as we try to build friendship, then we try to build community. But friendship itself needs something to kind of work together with, either shared objectives, shared values, or just being there for each other. So the things that we've learned is that effectiveness occurs when you put relationships before tasks. And this evening we've heard a lot about tasks. And I'm seeing people kind of nod now. But the reality is what we are trying to do is to build relationships that enables positive social change to occur in this world. And leadership doesn't come from top down, as someone is finding out right now, just a few miles down the border. It comes from sharing your vulnerability and allowing friendship and relationships to develop first. And as you allow that freedom to do that, then organizations can respond to that, and you can begin to respond to the social conditions that are occurring dynamically around you. Because, as I said, you go to bed at night, but you wake up in the morning, something dramatically changed. And somehow you have to design your organizational component and the human beings that are sharing that adventure so they feel comfortable with dynamic change. And the best way of doing that is to say, I'm your friend. I'm there with you, no matter what. Those points build the future that everybody in this room, I deeply believe, wants to make happen. It isn't a prescription. I cannot give a whole bunch of tasks that get us there. But I can say one thing. Leadership comes from allowing your vulnerability to take place. And the more vulnerable you are with people that you work with and you're honored to share the world with, the more you will influence positive change in their relationships and in their communities. So that's maybe the learning that we're still involved with, and that's ongoing.
Thank you. Never turn your back to the audience. I just did the fatal thing. I'm picking up a lot on the values that are important for doing this work. And really the word sharing came up a lot, whether it's sharing stories or sharing with relationships or being vulnerable to and open to friendships. So in the essence of sharing, and to change gears once again for another question, I'm going to ask a question of April and Yogi. Have you done any have you done any public engagement within Canada or have plans to do so? And if you could tell us a little bit about that, that would be great. I'll start first with April.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that I've been very remiss in not acknowledging the territories that we're on. The Coast Salish peoples have been incredible hosts to our organization for over 41 years. And, part of our local programming is only successful because it happens in partnership with our host nations. Songhees, Esquimalt, Sartlip have been, and Sauk Nation have been steady partners of our organization. We've brought people here from all over the world that have toured their nations, and they've been generous hosts to all. They've spent time with them in their communities, and that's a big part of the work we do, is just linking Indigenous peoples north-south. And it's a huge part of the work that I love doing. And I'll just give you two quick examples of what we do for public engagement that involves our host nations, as well as interested public and all those that have these shared concerns. One is called our Pacific Networking Conference, and we do that biannually. So it's usually hosted at the university, but this last one that we held in 2015 was co-hosted by the nations that I've just mentioned. So that meant we spent a day in each of their nations and learned about their initiatives. Like, for instance, in Sauk Nation, that would be the solar economy and the solar projects and the green economy that they're creating there through the wasabi. The going to Songhees and looking at wellness and spending time there looking at what wellness means and how they're reclaiming their lands and planning for the future. Going to Sartlip and seeing the revitalization of culture and spending time with master carvers and with linguists who are bringing back languages like Sinchothan and so forth. Learning about the Douglas Treaty directly from elders. I mean, that's kind of what we're producing. We're producing real experiences for knowledge exchange, and knowledge exchange is a really important part of what we do. But we also believe that you got to hook people a little bit, and how we do that is through something we do called the One Wave Festival. The One Wave Festival happens annually, and Yogi's been there before with his touch tanks, which are wonderful because it engages families and youth that might not normally ever hear about the Pacific issues in a celebration of Pacific arts and culture. And what we do is we bring them there with the arts, we hook them in with the arts, and then we've got them there with Sierra Club and Dogwood Initiative and on and on and on. When there's an election, we make sure all of them have tables, unless they stand us up like the Conservatives did. But So just opening those spaces. But the last thing I want to express is, like, for instance, there's a deeper component that goes to that public engagement work always, and it's kind of calculated. And one example I can give of that is that the Museum of Anthropology in Vancouver had an amazing exhibition called Footsteps of the Crocodile. And the Footsteps of the Crocodile featured master artisans from the Sepik River region of Papua New Guinea. We've been working with those communities for probably close to 30 years. And having that opportunity to have that exhibition at the Museum of Anthropology, we raised the funds to bring up people from Papua New Guinea, which included 2 master carvers and a master weaver. And the master weaver was one of the first women to ever travel out of the Sepik. So it was amazing just on that fact to have them here. They were here as part of the Aboriginal festivals as well as at their exhibition and so forth. And that all in itself is wonderful, but we took it that extra step where we actually addressed some of the things they're facing in their communities around extractive industries by holding panel presentations and by putting them face to face with scientists and people that had strategies that could really help them. For instance, putting together a water testing system in their community so they could prove that their water systems are being affected by the mine.
We have a problem with April in that we agree on too many things. And, we really admire what you managed to do. I think we do it slightly differently, but similar sort of approaches for some things. I think we're less public, but it's certainly this question of building respect and understanding amongst people from different areas. And we have a problem with Bolivia, where we work now. I called up the blood, I was going to give blood. And they said, "Oh, where's Bolivia?" on the phone, He said, isn't that somewhere in Africa? So, I mean, there are some challenges just at that level. So in our projects, we generally do exchanges, at the technical and political levels. So we put together, in the case of we had a problem in Brazil with the police, so we're working with the fishermen. The police would drive by the fishermen on the road and stop and beat them up just in case. And so we addressed that with sort of community policing, and we brought up, the police chief for Minas Gerais, toured them around here. Calgary Police happened to have a very good community policing program at the time. It had a wonderful impact in Minas, but it also, I got this little badge from community. I'm a officer now for Calgary Police. But it creates a lot of understanding in Canada as well. I think at that level that you were talking about, exposing vulnerabilities and building trust, and maybe on small levels, and it builds up and has surprising inputs. Now we do it, of course. The other thing that April mentioned was that what's interesting about the SDGs is that it means that we're responsible for our own backyard, jointly. We're not only responsible for someone else's backyard and happen to have the extra wisdom that allows us to tell them how to run things there. So that is a nice switch, and we're jointly responsible. So here we work, also with education, as April pointed out, and we work very hard with, building that level of respect, through nature education, but that respect for other people, other things that are living. It's all a very interesting and vibrant interaction, I think, that creates wonderful outputs.
Thank you guys so much. As I'm listening, I'm wishing that we could have a chance to hear all kinds of the stories, the really nitty-gritty stories of what worked and what didn't work. And I'm just dying to sit down with a few of them with a coffee. So I'll encourage all of you to get their cards and try to do that if you're interested in some of their stories. But one of the things that I wanted to do was find out from an intern what have been some of the lessons learned by you, Asia, as an intern while you were working in the engagement process or in the work that you do.
Thank you. That's a very good question. While I was on my internship in Zambia, I think mainly all of my learning was around relationship building. And that really is what I think most VIDEA interns experience. VIDEA works from a strong human rights-based approach to development, so we work as allies. And as someone who wasn't from the community I was working with in Zambia, just like when I've worked with Indigenous communities here, I am completely there to learn. I'm just there to learn and be a part. So allyship, definitely, was I think number one. Also learning from discomfort, because every day can be slightly uncomfortable, and it's wonderful. Patience also, because sometimes you think you know what's going on in a community or in an interaction on an internship such as that, or in any work when you're working with other cultures or other communities. But you don't always know what's going on, and it's really about being patient with yourself and being patient with others as you learn and as you work to just create those relationships and those positive experiences. Also upon returning, because I'm very much still in an engagement process with my internship. A lot of that is just me reflecting on what I learned there, and I think that'll always be ongoing. I'll always be learning something from my experience in Zambia. It's already really informed a lot of my life choices that I've made upon coming back, and will probably likely inform many other choices that I will make soon. So staying engaged with that process has been huge for me, and that's really what I love to do. And it's been easy because, coming back from Zambia after living there for 6 months, and I think a lot of the interns experience this when they return from overseas work. They don't know how they're going to stay engaged with that work, but it's there, it's in you, so you find ways, and yeah, it really informs decisions and informs the new relationships that you make, and yeah, you find ways to challenge yourself. So that's really been my experience, is staying engaged, challenging myself to stay engaged, and just continuing to learn. Thank you.
Continuing to learn. I think all of us are doing that every day when we do the work that we do, and it's still hard. It's one of, I'm smiling at Nancy as I say this, because she and I have had a couple of conversations about how do you create a learning organization? How do we make sure that we all learn from each other's knowledge and lessons that we've learned in the field and transfer them to each other? And so thank you for that message too. We're at our final question, and I'm going to ask Suzanne to answer this one. I've noticed that there's been no recipe cards from anybody with any questions, and that's okay. But what I might do once we're finished with this is just put the question out. If anybody else has some comments or questions, that we'll just hand the mic around so that people can speak. So Suzanne, you are our last and final speaker tonight. Do you have strategies or innovations that you think could be replicated or complemented?
I'm not sure they initially started as strategies, but they certainly evolved into that. It was very much, we're at one level, we're very much a grassroots organization, have only been in existence in 2010. But I think in terms of strategy, it's about capacity building. We're all working towards capacity building, but I think sometimes we need to reflect upon our own organizations and ourselves and recognize how can we best build the capacity of our own organizations to better serve the peoples that we're working with and trying to help build a better life for. I know that we started very organically almost, and now have evolved. We've had over 2,000 businesses start through the women that we provided training to, but always came back to the fact that we were limited by our own constraints of the ability to deliver the training. So we've now focused on train the trainer. Spent the last year looking at how we can replicate the models that we've developed and then take that forward in a bigger and more meaningful way. And with that tool also start to move outside of just East Africa and evolve into more significant partnerships that we can not only continue on the work we're doing, but build networks through events like this where now we can refer to one another. The other thing I'd like to mention, I'm not sure if it's in the context of this question, but we keep having this discussion around, local and global, and what does that really mean? And we've certainly talked about, sharing our stories, which I think is a big one. Empowering youth or informing youth, I think, is just key wherever we have an opportunity to go into schools or with youth groups to make presentations. We jump on that opportunity because they are the future of tomorrow. And if we can ignite their passion and shared vision, then it will just continue to be sustainable. But recently I was asked to deliver an entrepreneurial training program here in Victoria to a group of Syrian refugees. And I looked at that and thought, it's so circular. I, being a Canadian citizen, took my skills and experience with business and training and took that forward to East Africa. And the skills that I acquired through that learning process and capacity building for me and for One Love has now come back full circle to be serving people in our local community. And a lot of that was because, the context of the material, but also the ability to work through translators and ensure that knowledge transfer was there. So I think that's another one. And when we talk about sustainability, and I think that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, is to really look at how we can take things full circle.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And didn't she just beautifully wrap up the global to local, local to global circle that we see in front of us? And I wanted to actually also just backtrack one step. Thank you so much, April, for mentioning that we need to always be respectful and acknowledge the the traditional lands that we're standing upon. So thank you for that. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to pass the microphone around, and anybody that feels that they would like to introduce themselves, say something about what the work they're doing, or have a question or a comment, please feel free. It is now 8:20, and we have another 5 minutes or so. Pass this. Do I see any takers over here? Here we go.
In our experiences with working in Tanzania, we have found the most difficult part or the most rewarding part of being able to connect politically with people that you can work with, and it's their project, it's their request for imposing on them what we should be doing. And so to try and get to that level, you have to somehow start with the people that they know who they know in the upper organizations to get effective deal. And one of the best things to do is take the type of people that can literally connect with the type of people that you're going to be working with. For instance, when we take a doctor with us and they go to the health officer in that community, he then gets the respect and the respect of that municipal worker to implement some of the work that we do. And it really is important to connect with the type of people that you need to connect, because it isn't going to work if you just work side by side. The other thing is to maintain continuity with the projects that you do. If you go in and only drop in one time and drop the project, it's going to fail. You have to go back, and building that community, as you've mentioned, is so, so very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I didn't catch your name.
Eric Schultz. I'm with the For the Love of Africa Society.
Thank you. Now, somebody from this side. Here we go.
Hi, my name's Nancy Stewart, and I'm from the Canadian Catholic Organization for Development and Peace. And I'm picking up from what Eric said, and it was your question, John, that you asked us, that you said, how do we involve the local people rather than, telling them how to go about it or what they might need? And Development and Peace has been around for 50 years, Canadian organization. It's large, but it's based on funding projects that the people in the country already create, initiate, and then they want it funded. So we don't have any people from Canada who go there, other than we've built over the years partnerships with partners in those countries. And they actually are the ones who look around to see what local people are saying, this is what we need. And then they try and say, okay, well, how do you want to get that going? And then they will apply. And so we fund them. But then over the years, what's happened, of course, is as those partners have told us, what we want you in Canada to do is educate Canadians about the injustices and the global issues that are affecting us, and be our voice and advocate for your governments to change structures. And so really those people there, it's just phenomenal the kinds of projects that they get going. And because you're in communications, one of the projects we have right now is community radio in the Congo to help with the women combat sexual violence. It's so endemic there. And so, you know, I can see your organization helping with those kinds of communications, but in a country like that, community radio is where they are, you know, where we think we're beyond, you know, there's podcasts and all sorts of things. They're at community radio. Yeah.
Thank you. A really valuable lesson in, you know, where people are starting from.
Hi, my name is Eric Doherty. I'm with the newly formed group called the Better Transit Alliance of Greater Victoria. And I actually came out here only because the local transportation issues were mentioned on the invitation to this. And the Colwood Crawl, of course, was mentioned. And but personally, my motivation is around number 13, talking about the climate crisis, and of course, ocean acidification being closely linked to that. So what I'm wondering is, the Better Transit Alliance, we're working to stop the money being spent on things that increase greenhouse gas pollution in transportation in this region, like the Mackenzie interchange. It's not rocket science that you build more roads, you get more cars, more pollution, all that, and that it also makes the region less just. And we're working on the very simple expedient of getting the bus lanes on Douglas and Highway 1 to bypass the Colwood Crawl that we were promised in 2008. So my question is who wants to work on this and actually make it happen, and perhaps make the links to ocean acidification and what's happening to the oysters in the Salish Sea, or what's happening to communities in the South Pacific with sea level rise?
Thank you for your questions. We did have a really engaging session 2 weeks ago. You would have been very enthralled with that discussion. That was very much the local question about the SDGs. But I am going to pass the mic to Yogi. The question about the oceans, and then...
Yes, the oceans. I think I mean, clearly, the reality is that you know, we need to work locally to make these changes. But you know, the impact, say, of the Colwood Crawl on ocean acidification, it's directly is probably minimal. But you know, on a global scale, you add up all the Colwood Crawls together, you end up with an effect. If we stop the Colwood Crawl, no, it means that the ocean will probably continue acidifying. But no, because of Colwood Crawls elsewhere in the world, or you know, many years of historical impacts. So I think, you know, we can certainly talk about climate change and ocean acidification as drivers for some of these things. But I mean, the bottom line is, you know, we're looking for environmentally responsible behavior. And, this happens to be one of the tools that we can use to push that. And I think we can certainly try, as you are doing, pushing for, good solutions. And I think we can look at other parts of the world where, they have implemented solutions that, appear to be much more respectful to the environment or less damaging. But I think it is a challenge to keep, because say the negative components of climate change, they get sold so hard that people turn off. And so I think, somehow we need to balance that with some kind of positive messages. And some of those are, that, let's be respectful for the environment, not because it's going to cause ocean acidification, but because it's the right thing to do. I have a problem with this selling, that climate change thing too hard, in the sense that, I think the tourism for, hedonistic, hotels in the Caribbean, I mean, that's a booming industry right now because people say, well, the world's over, might as well have a good time. And I could see that the feedbacks are difficult to manage. Now, I mean, certainly in our education, our environmental education, we try to create, positive environments, which we hope will lead to these, responsible environmental behaviors. Of course, it's a mixed thing, but I would say, good. Congratulations. I think you're having some very good impacts, and I think we should all work with you on that. But I think we should be looking at other arguments as well.
April, did you want to speak to the other part about, I think you mentioned.
Thank you for mentioning our friends in the South Pacific and in so many places that are experiencing climate change in all its different faces, including ourselves for the last little while. So, I mean, I live in Souk, so I understand that call would crawl very well. And I always feel like really irresponsible if I am driving, so I try to balance it with my transit and working from home. So there are little changes you can make with, bringing other people with you, carpooling, all that kind of thing. But one of the ways that I really like to address that is, as an organization, is looking at policy change. Like, what is it we need to change at our federal and provincial and regional and municipal level, and what is it we can do? And, I have to look at these things through the South Pacific and Indigenous lens, and so I come at it maybe a little differently with how I approach it, but it's important that all of us engage in these issues. And just speaking about Indigenous ways of being, there's a real understanding of taking only what you need, and the lessons that are inherent within Indigenous peoples worldwide, I think need to be listened to. And one of the things that our organization is doing in 2018 is we're co-hosting an Indigenous Climate Change Summit in New Zealand. And so that is going to bring together people virtually as well as physically to look at this issue so that we can activate the Indigenous leaders internationally, and also provide tools and opportunities for Indigenous peoples on their own, to come together with these solutions to share them internationally.
Thank you both. I have another question here, just a moment. Virginia.
Hello there. It's been very educational this evening. I came out as a guest to learn, and it's such a wide range of amazing things you're doing. So I have a question to you. I guess it's more like a wish list question. If you could have one thing that you could achieve this year or within this year, what would that be? I mean, is it people, money, awareness? Just curious to know what's on your mind. What's the need this year?
Is that for one particular person? Oh, okay. Anybody care to take that on? Tim.
It's always the same every year. It's awareness for me, and I think for all of us who would, the more people are aware of what we do, the barriers fall away. For 40 years, my job's been to put my hand in people's pockets. People say, well, fundraising is really hard. Fundraising isn't hard, particularly if you can tell your story so that it affects the desire that sits within the other person, because all of us want to do something that's good. I mean, there are the odd one, and I think you reflected on somebody earlier this afternoon that may not be good, but that's what we want, and it's about awareness. So in this notion that was talked about, that Asia talked about, impatience, dealing with my board, they have this goal that they want to be here, but it takes time to get there. And the more we spend telling those stories, I did make the point that when I started, there were 0 press releases. Last year we had 938 of them. So, and that's a job that somebody comes and takes on and has worked very hard, but those are the things. So we can't do anything without awareness, in my opinion, but I'm sure somebody else might have an opinion.
Does anybody else have a wish? John?
I have a very, very big wish. And the word's has been mentioned, that is engagement. And each of us tries to involve the community, friends, family, etc., the world around us, to be engaged in something. And sometimes that is the most difficult thing to put your finger on. What is engagement and what does it mean? So anything which I'm working on as this year's theme for me is how do we get our organization a lot more engaged in Victoria, where we were once upon a time, 10 years ago, heavily involved in this community. And how do we get the nearly 2,000 people that we have in our foundation, and about 500 to 600 of those are based in Victoria, how do we actually get them engaged in this community so that people even know what we do? We are the mysterious organization that no one knows. So that's down to me. That's my job, is to figure that out with a great team of people. How can we be involved in this community so we can make a better community working together? And when we do that, then we can share those talents, those ideas, those visions, those passions with the world around us. And then we can really make things happen because we're now engaging the world. So engage ourselves, be vulnerable. Somewhere in there is my theme for this year.
Thank you so much, John and Tim. Suzanne?
Apart from the obvious around funding for this year, I think that's an obvious need for all of us. And certainly, as I mentioned, our expansion as part of a strategy to build capacity. But I think one of the things that I would wish for is for people to recognize that for those of us that are involved working in third world countries, that does not preclude us from working in our local communities. And I think that caring and sharing that we bring to our global work, we also apply to local issues. And I encounter it all the time, people saying, well, why are you doing that? Like, we have a lot of needs at home. Yes, we do. And, you know, I work on other boards locally and I contribute where I can and mentor where I can. But I think there's somehow this myth that if we're working with a focus on global communities, that we're not working on local communities. And I think the sooner we can start to link those two in the minds of people, I mean, I think we're clear how they're linked, but to create that awareness about the linkages, and I think that it will be to the benefit of everybody.
Thank you. Yogi?
I think we tend to live in bubbles of people, like we're here in the church, and I think we're all converted to this particular message. And we see the danger of that in the United States. I think what I would really like to see is, us to start looking outside of those bubbles. There are people that think otherwise, and all over the world. And I mean, we've got a big one happening right now. But somehow we have to build some relationship that allows us to work with the alternative human nature, and step outside of our bubble. And I think that's what I would really like to see, is some process that actually makes that work. Might be dreaming a little.
This is about wishing. Anybody else want to talk? Asia? Yeah? No? Do we have any other? We do have another question. Just a moment.
Hi everyone, my name's Ariel. I am here on behalf of Disaster Aid Canada. I'm running the Soap for Hope program. I'm also a volunteer with the Dogwood Initiative. I organize the Dogwood UVIT Club. And I want to say thank you so much for being here tonight, and especially to April for recognizing the traditional lands that we are visitors on right now. And yeah, so my question for you, anyone who'd like to answer this question as folks who do a lot of international work, how do you avoid this hero complex, this coming in and being the savior, when it's our history of colonization and our history, our current global ideals of development that are creating a lot of these issues that are happening in so many developing countries, and which has put us at the privilege of being able to go and say, hey, now we can help you, but those exact systems are the ones that are allowing it to occur. So yeah, wondering how you navigate that. I know that part of that has a lot to do with working with communities, and I think that's probably one really important facet, but if there's anything you can add to that, I'd be really interested. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your question. Okay, so glad this is working.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. That's a really good one. I think that in many ways it can't be avoided. I mean, I am encountered by that sort of, a lot of very well-meaning people are like, oh my gosh, that's so good. Like, you're doing so many good things. And I usually just challenge that notion by saying, I learned, and people in Zambia, for example, just as an example, because I've worked with other communities as well, but they know what they're doing, and I think I usually just try to challenge people who bring that to me. Zambians, even if they have no formal education, and most of them do, like they understand the frameworks that they're working in, and they know what they're doing. They're intelligent. I'm learning from them. I also think that it is problematic. Like, being a Westerner, being a white person, going into communities and working, it is problematic. And I think that any development work is by nature, but there's positive ways to do it. And a lot of that is just about relationships and partnerships and supporting initiatives of the people that you're working with. So I don't know, it's a tough one, but I think that international development and just community development in general, it is changing. It's changing from that paternalistic way of being, and I think that it's important to keep doing that work. And a lot of that work, there has to be lots of diversity in it, and even though it's problematic coming from a Western place and a Western perspective, you're not the only one working in it. There's so many people involved, so I usually just try to challenge it with those things, and hope for the best. Thank you.
It's interesting because before we started the formal part of the program, I was discussing part of this issue with Asia. And one thing I have noticed is that the millennial generation, which Asia belongs to, doesn't appear to have as much of that focus of the hero kind of mentality. And I have to say this as probably one of the ancient folks here, that it's the boomer generation that appears to have more focus on that. And BCCIC, I was at a conference about 6-7 years ago now, and we had a speaker in from Prince George that spoke to the folks and basically said, what is your motivation and why are you personally involved in international development. And the usual kind of things came out, passions, platitudes, whatever you want to call it. And that gentleman just hammered away, bang, 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 bang. There was a lot of discomfort. But one thing in common in that meeting, every single person there was a boomer. Every single person there had grown up with a philosophy of social change, with a political viewpoint. That was the last meeting I attended of BCCIC until we came back over the last few months. And that meeting was very, very apparent to me that there is a cultural change needed. And I have a lot more trust in how the millennial generation are approaching relationships and openness and transparency than I do with my own generation. Now, I'm probably going to get lynched as I go out, but I think that's important to share that. And that is one of the major issues I think we face. I trust these folks to actually bring us to where we should be going and exercise that leadership internationally.
I want to talk about a hero. We have a doctor who joined Mercy Ships for a 3-month stint 30 years ago. He's been a volunteer for 30 years. He doesn't consider himself a hero, but I certainly share his story as one who is a hero, because he's changing the lives of individual people who have serious maxillofacial situations, cleft lips, palates, major tumors. 3 weeks ago, I was fortunate enough to be in Benin, and I'm in the Hope Center, and there's a little girl there who's 20 years old who has a tumor the size of April's head attached to mine. And this guy's going to change that and give her a life that she can live. And so to me, there are still heroes there that are making those kinds of things. And so be cautious with that kind of language in a sense, but I agree with you that shouldn't be the motivation for anyone, and it certainly isn't for Dr. Parker.
This is such a good question. Thank you. It's really something that all of us have to have that lens on and really be very thoughtful about. And one of the things that we try to do as an organization is look at, take that lens about colonization and look at how we're approaching each of these different situations to make sure we're not doing that ever again. And, how we do that is we start with the relationships. So, I was mentioning that we have a 30-year relationship in the Sepik. Well, it's very similar in West Papua, and we have strong relations and long relations in Vanuatu. But, they're very strong foundation to those relationships. Those are people and organizations that are connected to the communities. And so what I see us as is almost like, it's not even a facilitation. Occasionally it is, but it's we're a toolkit, and how can we help you? And so that's kind of how we approach it. So, bunch of tools, but if we don't have the tool, we know where to find it, or we try.
I agree that the word hero should not come into it at all. I think it's nice for those of us that have the pleasure of returning to communities year after year and meeting people in the areas that we're working with. It's nice to get that warm greeting. I think that compensates in just a small way for the many, many sleepless nights we have worrying about there's not enough time to do what we need to be doing, how are we going to have the capacity to be doing that. But the other thing I wanted to mention is when it comes to, and echoing your sentiment about relationships, when we're going into any new communities, it is about developing relationships. And it comes down to the fundamental aspect of respect. I think anybody that goes into third world countries with the expectation that we're here to solve your problems, that will very quickly go right out the window. We're not there to solve their problems. I often say that I think I have been taught more by the people in East Africa than I've ever been able to impart to them. So it's understanding their culture, respecting their culture from the onset, and then learning from that. But it's not a matter of us going in and solving the problems of the world. And if that mentality is maintained, those relationships are not going to flourish at all.
I'm sure you need the publicist to say that you probably are a hero.
Oh.
I think, I mean, it's a word that you've used, but I think, we all understand what you mean by it. And I think hero is still quite a valuable word in different contexts. But as April says, we all face this question. And in our case, we tend to have projects that, we have funding for 3 years. And so it's that question, do you helicopter in and do something for 3 years and then wander off into the mist? So, we try very hard to work with local organizations or that are working in the area and address questions that, they need help with. But of course, sometimes, the horizon that they recognize isn't what they could recognize. And so we try to work with partnerships in the sense of, building, different ways that you can look at things. But yeah, it's not an easy story and a continuing challenge.
Thank you all. I see 2 more hands. I'm really being very cognizant of the time. It's now 8:50. I think what we might want to do is just have you save your questions and ask them after we wrap up. Is that make sense to everybody? Just to put a lid on it. Okay. So from my perspective, I am so grateful to have been asked to take part in this session. The themes, I was asked to, collect a few themes, and I've got sticky papers all over this, so clearly I didn't do my job, except to say that so much of this is focused on relationships and values and learning. And so between all of our conversations, I think we could pull the threads of what kind of values do we all share? Is it, relationships before tasks, as John had mentioned, or building trust, which I think April and Suzanne mentioned, and well, there were so many, I just can't go on, but I'm really very encouraged that CIC is making a space and a place for us to have these conversations, because that's where we're going to learn more. And I'm sure that later, when we look at the video that's happening, we can tease out some of these themes a little more thoroughly and perhaps offer more intensive discussions about a particular theme. But in the meantime, I just want to thank or ask all of you to put your hands together for our wonderful panelists that came here tonight. And I'm going to ask Anita to come up with her wrapping up comments.
There's a lot of notes up here. Okay. Well, the word that comes to mind is that this has been an extremely rich evening. And it's my honor to thank you all for coming, for saying what you say. I think we're very privileged to be having these conversations. Let's see. I think what comes to mind is we're doing the work of the impossible, especially with our goals to transform the world in 15 years. But if you don't do something that's impossible, how do you ever do something that's possible? And I always figure if you're unreasonable, you might get reasonable results. So that's where I'd like to hang out and bless us all with those words. Okay. The thank yous. First of all, thank you, panelists. I have a little treat for you in a minute, but I don't want you to get too excited with that at the moment. And thank you very much, Carla. Where'd she go? There you are. Thank you. You did a very fine job of moderating this and making it very friendly. You know, I'd like to thank the church, and I don't know if anyone's here from the church, but this is, oh, thank you. They provided a beautiful space and a few extras, and so we really appreciate that. I think this is a wonderful place to be. It has a really good feel to it. The sponsors are on the back of the program, and they are, I will read them, they are Global Affairs Canada, The Market on Yates, Whole Foods, Serious Coffee, Country Grocer, Save On Foods, and our videographers, Kirk Schwartz and Madeline Story and MediaNet. So we're going to be looking very much for that video because we want everyone to see this. Let's see, is there anything else? Yeah, thank you to the committees worked hard on this. The South Vancouver Island chapter has worked hard on this, and Linda, the coordinator, has worked hard on this. See her if you would be interested in becoming a member. We're not pushing it, but you know, hey, it's a good thing. There will be more things coming up, and one of the things to look forward to in this spring will be the all candidates meeting that's going to be hosted, I think, in part by this organization. I wasn't at the meeting yesterday. Were you there? Yeah. So look forward to that. If you're not signed up, please sign up so you can get the information that you need, because one of the things that I learned last week was that every politician in the province has been given a questionnaire about the SDGs. So my son is a politician, and I'm going to be asking him what he's thinking about that questionnaire. And so don't be afraid to, you know, like we're going to be having this. There will be a webinar on BCCIC about political engagement, about how to be powerful in speaking to your members, your legislators, whether they be provincial or federal. And I happen to be a federal kind of advocate person, so I know it makes a huge difference. I know it makes a huge difference to get in relationship with your politicians. They are the ones that have a whole bunch of leverage to help us all with our projects and our commitments. Lastly, thank you for coming. We very much appreciate that you were a very attentive audience. Thank you for those that came and made displays or put their displays out. This is only the first you're going to hear from South Vancouver Island chapter of the BCCIC. I was very, very pleased with this panel discussion. I think it was extremely good, extremely, well, I hope you have the same feeling of feeling educated and inspired as I did. So thank you very much, and I'm now going to hand out the treat.